So this, let's call it a Gaian consciousness. It's gradually taking root inside people. People are waking up to it more and more, but it's slow. I think the waking up is far slower than the rate of destruction. And what we need now is the rate of waking up to overtake the rate of destruction. And the waking up's got to happen on a massive scale. And I don't know how that's going to happen. The positive side is that cultural revolutions can happen very quickly. Revolutions in consciousness can happen very quickly. This one has got to happen quicker than any other, and it's got to happen fast and on a global scale. And it's got to transcend national boundaries, political boundaries, all the sorts of boundaries that we humans have erected between ourselves, gender boundaries, all those boundaries, they've got to fall down. And we all have to unify to protect our very own planet, for her own sake and for our sake and for the sake of all beings. Is that going to happen?
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The concept of the Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system, which keeps everything we need replenished as long as we all respect it and use wisely. So an understanding of how this system works, along with deep cooperation between humans and all life, is essential to keep us thriving and the spaceship flying. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with humans involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness, and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, activists, writers, designers, adventurers, healers, entrepreneurs, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of a more beautiful, life-sustaining world, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings, Earthling. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is Dan, your host. Thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. If this is your first listen, welcome. So first up, I'm going to ask you for a favour before we get into this episode. Would you mind heading on over to your podcast provider like Apple or Spotify or whatever and give this show a rating and a review? It will take 60 seconds max and we'd be most grateful. So why, Dan, why should I do that, I hear you say? Well, the thing is, this podcast is entirely self-funded. There's no advertising, there's no external funding, it's funded by me, and there's a lot of folks that put a lot of time and energy into making this happen. So if you leave a review on your provider like Apple Podcasts, it will make the show travel to more folks. The more reviews, the more the podcast travels up in people's searches. So if you'd like to give that a go, we'd be very, very grateful. Right. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Dr. Stephan Harding, holistic scientist, deep ecologist, co-founder of the legendary Schumacher College. Stephan's work intersects scientific ecology with Gaia Theory and the world of psyche and soul. He is author of 2 books, Animate Earth and his new publication, Gaia Alchemy. Now, Stephan has worked and taught alongside the world's leading ecological thinkers, feelers and activists, and worked closely and was mentored by scientist and author James Lovelock himself, who coined the Gaia Theory Hypothesis. I was very lucky to be taught by Stephan back in 2010, and his approach to experiential learning was an absolute game changer for me. My introduction to Gaia Theory by him was pivotal in my understanding and experience of our living Earth and the journey I've been on over the last decade. Gaia Theory has influenced my own take on this remix of the Spaceship Earth idea, seeing the operating system, if you like, of our spaceship as a living system made up by complex, interconnected relationships between all life, which demands cooperation and participation between every living thing. Hence the becoming crew analogy. This conversation covers much ground. Stephan grounds us in a Gaian context, his own journey of becoming a scientist, and his deep early sense of a lack of soul in the Western science discipline, and how that has led on to so much destruction of our living world. How do we value our feelings for the more than human world, and how to bring moral ethics into all of this, which is what we explore in his new book, Gaia Alchemy. We speak of the urgency of these times and much more. Stephan is an absolute legend. His wisdom, I believe, is crucial for these times, and there is real gold in this conversation. I was left with a deep reflection, actually, after this conversation on the, let's call it in Stephan's word, this Gaian shift being called for right now. Stephan speaks about his belief that the ancient Gaia came back into our Western culture through the scientist James Lovelock and the influence that he has had in the scientific world. But we speak of the urgent need for what he would call Gaian consciousness. We might call it deep ecological consciousness. We might call it a paradigm of interconnection and interbeing. All of it really is working from a sacred place that says the world is in fact alive. Nature is in fact a living, complex, animate, sentient, intelligent, and vast, diverse web of life in relationship with all other life. In short, a world deep in complexity, mystery and intelligence than our Western world view of modernity, which sees nature as a resource, inert, dead matter over there. As Stephan says, Gaian consciousness is beginning to wake up in more people, but it's not happening at the pace of destruction of our living world and of climate breakdown. And it needs to happen faster and at a massive scale. We're talking a revolution in consciousness, if you like. Now, I'm increasingly of the view that what if Gaia is in fact seeking to come back into our collective consciousness in this moment through the artists and the cultural creatives, those of us who can story and inspire, encourage and guide this deep transformation to occur across our cultures, this falling back in love with life itself and all of the vast, unknowable intelligence of the more than human world. Humans who can bridge and connect and inspire what our indigenous brothers and sisters and ancient ancestors have always known. This, I feel, is the time. I can see it and sense it increasingly in musicians, in writers, in filmmakers and storytellers, in culture jammers and hackers, in creative activists, in mischief makers, poets and citizens, healers and young parents. I can sense it in the young. What if we put this shift at the centre of our individual creativity and energy? What might happen? Before things unravel in ways that we will not be able to deal with. When I look at temperatures in parts of Asia right now, 50 degrees C plus at just 1.1 degrees of warming, and then look at the total blocked stuckness and denial of government, corporations and media in the global north and beyond to comprehend and accept what is going on, then I'm not overly confident. What is it going to take for old power to accept the situation we're in and act meaningfully? So I'm wondering, if you're not putting your creative energy into dismantling these destructive systems, beliefs and stories of separation and accelerating a shift to an interconnected, life-sustaining cultures, then what are you doing? This is the most urgent and creative challenge of our lives and for the future lives on this earth. It's also where all the most interesting and beautiful shit is happening. So get in there, find a crew, get involved. So let's cut to it. This is episode 60 of the Spaceship Earth podcast with Dr. Stephan Harding. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Stephan, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, it's brilliant to have you here. Whereabouts are you right now on our Spaceship Earth?
I'm in South Devon, very near Schumacher College at Dartington. in a converted double garage, which is our study.
Amazing. Brilliant. Well, as I say, we did attempt, didn't we? There was a fleeting moment where we might have been able to do this out and around about Schumacher. So thank you for taking the time to join us on this. Before we sort of dig in, actually, I just wanted to share a bit of gratitude, actually, for your work and for all that you have put out into the world. Because for me, like, I think as I say, I first came across your work it was 2010, when I spent a week down at Schumacher College, where you hosted us for a kind of week of Gaia Theory, and I have to say, life's never been the same since.
That's right.
Yes, I was going to say, not in a bad way, in a truly much more sort of expansive way. But it, I have to, it really was quite an experience. I mean, even before we sort of dive into Gaia, I guess just the way of learning that you offered us down there, and the kind of the experiential nature of it, and the kind of, for me, like this very sort of deep, meaningful way of learning, which was just quite profound at the time, something I'd never experienced. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and say thank you for all of your work.
Thank you very much for that. That's nice to know.
So what I was hoping we could start this conversation, whether we could help maybe, or you could help maybe kind of guide our listeners, if you like, a little bit into the sort of Gaian experience, the Gaian view of the world, just to help kind of ground listeners in the sort of context of this work and our conversation. So I wonder if there's a way to just, where you might be able to sort of give people a little bit of a sense of what this is all about before we dive into your books.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, there's many different aspects to Gaia. If we look at the concept of Gaia historically, we have to go back towards the ancients, to ancient Greece. Let's stop at ancient Greece, although you can go further back into ancient India, which is probably where the notion of Gaia came from. But let's just go to ancient Greece. For the ancient Greeks, Gaia was the firstborn of primordial chaos. You see, so she's a real mythological deity. She's a deity, and she's mythological, and she's the first created material thing, first created material being that has come out of this vast, formless, matterless intelligence, which the ancient Greeks called chaos. This sort of, it's very mysterious. We can't understand it. I don't think they could either. This sort of great potentiality to become, but it hadn't become. It was an intelligence that hadn't become but wanted to become matter. And perhaps it pondered and pondered. Perhaps there was no time, no space, but anyway, for ages and ages. And eventually it realized that the best thing it could become was the deep-breasted earth, as the ancient Greeks would say. And out of chaos came Gaia. Didn't have any animals or plants or humans on her at that point. It's not clear what she did have, but anyway, soon the sea arose, and then eventually she gave birth to the sky, to the stars, to the cosmos. So you see how primordial Gaia is. She gave birth to the cosmos with all the stars and the planets and the sun. And then she mated with Uranus, which is the cosmos, with the universe of stars and planets and the sun. She mated with her own son. And out of that came all the animals and the plants and eventually the humans, and of course the gods and the goddesses, various echelons and races of gods and goddesses. So that's who Gaia was for the ancient Greeks. She was a divinity, more than a goddess, a divinity. She was the mother of all the gods and goddesses. She was the mother of all, the mother of everything, and the steadfast base of all things, as Hesiod wrote about 500 BC when he wrote down these ancient myths of Gaia. So right at the center of our culture, we have this idea, this perception that the earth is a sacred divinity, firstborn of primordial chaos. And this is deep in our unconscious, you could say. Because, of course, what happened later on was, say, around about the time of the scientific revolution, particularly, but even before that, actually, this mother goddess, Gaia, the mother goddess, was basically repressed, and we were cut off from her. It wasn't just in the scientific revolution. It happened in the Neolithic, long before the scientific revolution, maybe about 4,000 years ago, whereas the scientific revolution was only about 200 or so years ago. During the Neolithic, the goddess cultures were conquered and subjugated by the sky god people from the steppes of Europe. They were warlike people who swept over the goddess Neolithic cultures of this part of Europe and southern Europe, and they repressed and got rid of the goddess, the Gaia, and replaced her with a sky god, masculine sky god. And the scientific revolution picks up on that sky god, as indeed does Christianity. And it imposes this divinity, at least Christianity, not science any longer, because science is atheistic, but Christianity imposes this sky god divinity. Man is a geometer for Descartes, one of the founders of the scientific revolution in the 17th century. He's a great mathematician, engineer, geometer. He makes the whole universe like a great cosmic clockwork, sets it running, and then stands back. Gaia's completely gone. And because of that view, we destroy the Earth, or our culture has destroyed the Earth, because we've just seen it as a soulless, meaningless mechanism that we can exploit as we wish. Descartes, of course, still had God. It's the kind of God I mentioned, the mechanistic sky god. But we've even lost that now. So things were getting really bad by around about 1960, you know. We were wrecking the planet quite nicely, even in 1960. And Gaia, in my view, has never gone away. I mean, Gaia as a deep perception of reality, if you like, or even as the divinity of some kind of mysterious archetype in the unconscious, never gone away. She's always been there. In the 1960s, things are so bad that she needs to come back into our culture, in my view. And she realizes that this time she's got to come back through a scientist. She tried to come back in the 19th centuries through the Romantic poets, and before the 19th century, with William Blake, and didn't work. You know, no one listened to them in any serious way. So now it's 1960, the climate change is getting worse, biodiversity destruction is getting worse. She knows that it's no good going to poets and artists. We have to go to a scientist. And she looks around, I like to think, in the souls of many scientists. And the one she finds, only finds one scientist who's capable of understanding what she means and putting that into a scientific context. Although I think he was largely unconscious of that. And that person is, of course, James Lovelock. And then through James Lovelock, we get a scientific explanation or a scientific exposition of Gaia, which is the idea that the Earth is like a living organism, a self-regulating living organism, because of all the interactions between the living beings, that's to say the biota, and the rocks, the atmosphere, and the water on the planet. They interact through complex feedbacks, which we can model mathematically and measure, of course, to some extent. And we get an emergent property from those interactions, which is the ability of the whole system of the Earth to regulate its surface conditions within the narrow limits that life can tolerate. So you could say that this shows that the Earth is like a gigantic planetary organism. And Lovelock was prescient enough to give the name Gaia to this Earth system. He got the name Gaia from his friend William Golding, who was a novelist. And so that's how Gaia has come back into our culture, through science. And I really think we need Gaia very badly right now.
Yeah, and Will, amazing. Thank you for sort of setting that context. Beautiful. And I think, because if we go back into your loop back into your earlier career, so you work quite closely with James Lovelock. That's right. He was almost a mentor to you, right?
It's very much my scientific mentor. Yes, I'd never met a scientist like him.
Yeah.
So he was very much my scientific mentor, and I did work scientifically with him for several years, working on his Daisy World model, and I visited him a lot. In his laboratory at home. He's an independent scientist, so in those days he had a laboratory in his home on the Cornwall-Devon border with about, I can't remember how many acres of land, 12, 15 acres of land, which he'd allowed to go wild. in the middle of the sort of English devastated agricultural landscape. There was Lovelock's place, full of native trees and a beautiful pond, and it was a wonderful oasis. And there was Jim and his wife Sandy, and I'd show up, and we'd go into his laboratory, and we'd talk about Gaia. We'd go for walks, and we'd talk about Gaia. We'd do some Daisy World modeling. It was fantastic. Really, it was such a privilege to be with him like that. I wasn't the only one. There were several other people who spent a lot of time with him, mostly climate modelers. And he's had a huge influence on climate modeling. I mean, it wouldn't be the same without him. So yes, he was a great mentor, and I spent a lot of time with him. And he's a scientific genius, I think, of tremendously important stature.
And at that point, am I right in saying you were an ecologist? You were coming from an ecology. Was that right? You were coming more from an ecology background.
Well, I was. Yeah, I mean, I was a scientist myself. I think I still am a scientist, but of a different kind. I like to think of myself as a holistic scientist rather than a reductionist, mechanistic scientist. So I was trained in science from a young age, and I ended up doing a PhD in ecology at Oxford. And so I was always dissatisfied with it. There was always something very dry, something missing.
What was that? Can you
it's very
name
simple.
It?
Soul.
Yeah.
Science as I was taught it, was utterly soulless. In fact, you couldn't talk about soul because that was taboo. There was no such thing as a soul. It was just all a mechanism. So your body is a form of exactly what Descartes said. The world is a clockwork. Only this time, in modern times, it's not just a clockwork. It's more like a complex computer. Although that's breaking down now, I'm glad to say. But the time when I was being trained as a scientist, when I had doing my first degree in the 70s, it was the time of the selfish gene. I had a tremendous success, the idea of selfish gene, and that selfishness ruled the roost and all of that. And I found it very depressing. I just couldn't accept it. I knew there was something wrong with that whole view, even though some of the discoveries of mainstream science, like the DNA molecule and the way DNA is transformed, or the information is transformed into proteins, and how proteins fold, and biochemistry, and then ecology, all of that was absolutely fantastic. But it was soulless, and I just couldn't accept it. I felt very uncomfortable and deeply unhappy throughout my entire scientific training, even through PhD, up to PhD level.
Because you talk about in, if I remember rightly, I think this was during your PhD in Oxford, where you were studying this piece of woodland and the story of the munkjack deer.
Yes, that's right.
Because that was that. It's funny. I picked that up because when I was 8, actually, my mum and dad moved to a place that was surrounded by munkjack, and I remember I remember these little creatures, and I remember tracking them and
did you?
Nice. All kinds of stuff. But I remember reading that because that was a bit of a threshold moment for you. It was something quite important sort of was happening for you at that time. Would that be right?
Yes. Well, I'd come back from. I hadn't gone to Costa Rica, but I'd been in Venezuela, where I was born. I'd gone back to Venezuela, and I'd done some biology. I came back to England. This is before I went to Oxford. And I found a wood near my parents' place where I was staying that had these little tracks of, very tiny little cloven hooves all over the place. And I wondered, goodness, what are they? Who's making those? So I used to go into the wood and hide myself at dusk. And then I'd see these tiny, exquisite little deer. I mean, beautiful, tiny little things. I think their smallness is, for me, part of their charm. Yeah. And I was love at first sight, as soon as I saw this little deer crossing the ride at night or at dusk in these woods, I just fell in love. They reminded me of duikers, these little antelopes that I used to see in the African bush when I lived there when I was 19 years old. And they're ecologically analogous to the duikers, but the deer are not antelopes. They're deer. Anyway, so then I went to Oxford looking for a PhD place, and I suggested to them that I should do a PhD on muntjac because no one had done that, and they accepted me to do that. Then I found this wonderful wood near Oxford called Rushbeds Wood, where I spent many, many years studying the muntjac. And there I had to collect lots and lots of vegetation data and also radio tracking data on the muntjac. So very hard work, very repetitive, very monotonous, and very mechanistic. And, I needed all the data. I wanted the data. It was important to have those data to understand the complex ecology of the muntjac deer and their behavior in relation to the ecology. But there were times when I would just stop collecting the data when my brain just hurt so much from focusing on plant cover values and measuring tree breast heights and things like that. I would be exhausted with that. And I'd lean up against a tree and just breathe and relax and look up into the canopy, say in the summer. It was the most wonderful, quiet place in those days, an ancient woodland. Hadn't been disturbed for at least maybe 100 or more years. And I was the only person there for years and years. I hardly saw anyone else there. For all those years I was there. And I would something would take me, another sensitivity would take me over. I would suddenly merge with the whole being of the wood. I would feel the wood as a great living being, as one great whole. Because I knew the wood intimately, every little speck of it I knew really intimately. And so the wood is as if the wood opened itself to me, and it let me into its kingdom, a kingdom beyond measurement, a kingdom beyond numbers, a kingdom beyond quantification, a kingdom beyond our current scientific understanding of what nature is. The wood brought me into a deep living sense of the wholeness of nature. And then that expanded slowly to encompass the entire planet. I would feel the whole planet, it's somehow alive. It's very beautiful experiences I would have. And those experiences kept me going through my PhD, which was very hard physical and intellectual work. It really was. And I had to be a very good mainstream scientist. And then after Oxford, I went to Costa Rica for a couple of years. And then I came back and then helped to found Schumacher College. And that's where I met James Lovelock. And when I met James Lovelock, it's as if I had found what I'd been missing in science, which was a sense of the whole planet as one great living being, in the way I'd intuited at Rushbed's Wood, but now this time given a proper scientific foundation. So there was a consistency between my deep intuitive experiences in Rushbed's Wood, working with the muntjac, and Gaia Theory from James Lovelock. They came together beautifully. And then I think a couple of years later, Arne Næss, great Norwegian philosopher who founded or coined the term deep ecology, he came. And that also added to my understanding. And then we had James Hillman from, you could say a post-Jungian psychologist, and Thomas More and Jules Cashford. So Schumacher College was a kind of alchemical crucible for me. David Abraham as well. I mean, so many of the great feelers, experiences, thinkers, knowers of Gaia in our times came to the college, not just famous people, but also participants from all over the world. Yeah. So I became part of this sort of alchemical crucible for brewing Gaian consciousness.
Love it. I love that. I love that term, the great feelers of our world. I love that.
Yeah, because they're always talking about thinkers, aren't we?
Yeah, and that's because I remember, like, as I say, one of that first week with you down at Schumacher, it was that ability, that encouragement to feel the world, which was just, I know, and my fellow students I know experienced the same thing, but it was just something so. It felt so right, but yet something I think for many of us, well, for me anyway, just never been encouraged, I mean, I think I was mid-30s, I think, when I came to Schumacher, and that whole idea that you could feel your way into the world. When, I grew up in the sort of, I was born in the 70s, right? I mean, it was a heady world, it was like that, everything was in the head, and so that idea, and I think that's what was so interesting about your work and these others that you speak to, of sort of bringing kind of sensing and intuition and feeling into this kind of scientific realm, which was, I mean, I think a couple of things we did with you that week, like, I mean, just the things where you'd speak, you'd invite us. We'd be in the old postern, and you'd be showing us kind of like some slides of talking us through Gaia theory. And I remember that you shared the great acceleration work, which has stuck in my head since then, because it's so it tells you everything, right, about that story of separation, I guess. And but then you sort of opened up the doors into the Gaia and said, right, let's go into Gaia. Because right now we're outside Gaia, although we're inside. We're inside the building, and those invitations to sort of to feel our way into the world. I'm guessing when you speak to that journey you've been on, that must have been, when you were having those experiences in the wood with the monk chair. I mean, the way that you were kind of seeing and feeling and sensing the world, it must have been quite hard to share that in those times. Was it not?
It was.
Yeah,
it was. I mean, there were some of my fellow PhD students who are really great friends of mine. I was very lucky to be part of a wonderful cohort. There were people studying hyenas in Africa, badgers, foxes, mara, an animal called a mara in Argentina. I mean, birds of all sorts. It was an amazing group of young people doing their PhDs, all of us together. And with some of them, I could discuss these sorts of things, but not very many. And also, I wasn't able to articulate it very well anyway. I wasn't quite sure what it was. Of course, I was very well of Jung. I'd been very keen on Jung since I was about, 23, 24, or even earlier. So I knew about Jungian psychology, so that helped me a lot. But certainly with the tutors, no, you couldn't do it. And it just wasn't part of science. It wasn't anything you talked about. In fact, there's a bit of embarrassment about it. You really shouldn't mention these things. It's kind of a real taboo. So what's happening was that the emphasis on thinking was way too great. We need to think. Of course we do.
Yeah.
But the opposite of thinking for Jung is feeling. Now, feeling, we have to be clear what it is. It's actually feeling the value of something. It's not an emotion, although there are emotions associated with feeling and with thinking and with sensing and intuition. But feeling is basically about value, about perceiving how the value of something. So with nature, of course, the feeling is of its immense value. I mean, beyond words, of its intrinsic value, as Arne Næss would say. And then the sensing is just the sheer delight of the experience of seeing a tree or seeing a bird. And the intuition is a sort of intuiting where it's going, where it's come from, its purposes, what its aims are, where it's going. And the thinking we know very well. I mean, we're familiar with that, mathematical modeling, quantification, which is all fine, collecting facts, looking for patterns. That's all fine. But we need to put all those four together. And our culture is just focused mostly on the thinking, and we're a heavily scientific culture. And that's part of the problem, because science, I like to say, has made us clever, but it hasn't made us wise. The evidence is the destruction that Western culture, the heavily scientific culture, has wreaked upon the entire planet. Everywhere we've gone, we've wrecked the planet, especially now with our scientific understanding. But don't get me wrong, I'm a scientist and I love science, so I'm not criticizing science, the deep aspects of science in any way whatsoever. What I'm criticizing is its denigration of feeling, basically of feeling. Most scientists know that you have to have some intuitions, and every scientist will agree you have to have sensing to do science, but feeling, ethics, morals, for example, until now haven't really been part of science. I think it's changing gradually.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There was there's a lot coming up here, but I remember when you sort of shared that, the view of the scientific revolution, and where the kind of story of separation of humans from nature was really hatched, really kind of profoundly sort of launched, if you like, into this modern world. And the idea, that sort of vision of nature as a machine, dead matter, inert, all that view. And when we look at that, it's only really a few hundred years old, right? So it was effectively it's a story, if you like. But I always wondered, what do we understand? What do we know about just before that time? I guess how people, particularly in these landscapes we're here, how did people know the world? Do we have a sense that there was a lot more meaning and mystery in people's lives in terms of their relationship to all that wasn't human. Or I'm sort of curious about that, how that kind of, what that looked like.
Yeah. Well, you can look at what anthropologists have discovered, particularly, say, around about 1950s or before the really serious destruction got going. And what you find is that indigenous people in many parts of the world have a tremendous connection with nature. They see, we would say, to use analytical language, they see nature symbolically. So a tree is not just an external object as it is for most of us Westerners. It's a living being that has a symbolic meaning for me. It's the tree of life. It's a tree that you can communicate with. If it's a certain kind of tree, it could be a very sacred tree. It could be a wise elder of the forest. It could be a sort of tree you have to give an offering to. It's a kind of sort of tree you must honor and recognize and sit underneath to gain wisdom. After all, remember the Buddha, he sat under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya and became enlightened. And the tree helped him with that. So it was the same for rivers and mountains and animals and plants. They all had a symbolic meaning. And by that I mean that they related to something very deep in our own psyche. They were part of our psyche. There was no separation.
It was family.
And that's if you look at anthropological records, you find this. This is how we are naturally in relation to nature, to Gaia. We are naturally animistic. We have a very natural spiritual relationship with nature, if you like. It's part of who we are. Children have it. Our own Western children have it. They get so excited by nature, don't they? And they speak to stones, and little children even go around. Some little children go around with a few stones in their pockets that they talk to. The stones become their friends.
I still do.
Well, that's good. I think we should do that, you see.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why we can't do that and have an animistic relationship with nature and be scientists at the same time. There's certain things we wouldn't do, for example. We wouldn't chop down a tree just to get some knowledge of the tree unless the tree wanted us to do it. We'd have to ask whether we could do certain things. In science at the moment, we just do what we like. We treat nature as just sort of dead, inert stuff, or maybe not dead, but certainly stuff that doesn't feel. What I'm trying to say is that we can still have that indigenous kind of perception of nature and be modern people, with our science and our technology to some extent. There's no contradiction there at all. And I think that's where we need to go. We need to recover the indigenous person in ourselves and link that with the best things from modernity and reject the worst things from modernity, which there are too many, I'm afraid.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
When did you, and again, you referenced Arne Naess and, his work around the ecological self and, this idea of experience, that we have to kind of experience the living world, the more than human world, in order to, and that kind of fuels, I guess, our curiosity, our questioning. And then I think that cycle that you spoke of the experience and questioning leads to commitment. But when did you really, within your teaching, that moment of actually you've really got to bring this experiential learning, I guess, into the work? What was that? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when it happened, to be honest with you. And when I first came to Schumacher College to help found it, we had 3 months just setting the place up. We knew James Lovelock was going to teach the first course. 3 months later, I had no idea what I was going to do, and nobody else did either. So I didn't know. I read lots of genetics. I was just going to teach some standard ecology and biology. I was the ecologist in residence. That's all I knew, But of course, I'd had my own deep experiences in nature, but I wasn't sure bring them into people. So anyway, how did it happen? I don't know. I mean, I would take people on field trips. That was the thing. I think it started there. I would take people outdoors. When I say field trips, it would just be nice walks in nature. Particularly, I think the one we did with you, probably down the valley of the Dart. We're in the higher reaches of the River Dart, where it's woodland.
Yeah,
up on Dartmoor for several kilometres of woodland. Very rare kind of situation in Great Britain.
Yeah,
which is so utterly and horribly destroyed, nature-wise. There's this down the River Dart, high up. There's a long stretch of woodland below Dartmeet.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's like walking back in time. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's pretty dangerous down there in places where there's no tracks. And
I was swimming there last week. Actually, it was very cold.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's very cold. I think there it started. This connection with other people coming into nature. So it sort of gradually happened. I also did lots of walks along the coast from Little Dartmouth to Dartmouth, which happens to be around 4.6 kilometres, actually a little bit more. And there, it was just a walk. And I realized one day that I could, with a student of mine called Sergio Marashin, a really brilliant geologist, we realized that we could turn those 4.6 kilometers into what we called a deep time walk.
Yeah.
So those 4.6 kilometers could represent 4,600 million years, which is the age of the Earth approximately. And we could tell the story of the Earth as we walked, starting from the deep past and going towards the present.
Which we did with you on the moor, which was again just a mind-blowing experience, because I remember this extraordinary day out on the moor where we walked and learned all about this evolution of this Earth. And I think, what was it? It was like something like the last minute or something of the walk. We kind of walked through, the last few hundred years, and
the last 200 years, which is the Industrial Revolution. Just a correction, I may have said the scientific revolution earlier. I may have said the scientific revolution started 200 years ago. It was 400 years ago. So if I did say that, there's a correction.
That's okay.
Anyway, 200 years ago was the Industrial Revolution, which has created so much havoc on the planet. That's 1/5 of a millimeter on the scale of 4.6 kilometers equals 4,600 million years, which is the age of the Earth. On that scale, every millimeter we walk is 1,000 years. Every meter is 1,000,000 years. So 200 years is 1/5 of a millimeter. That's pretty mind, but that has a big effect on people.
Yeah, and you've been doing that for years, haven't you? And you must have seen, and now you've turned it into this app, and that's an extraordinary thing. That must be
with Robert Woodford and various other folks. Yes, there's an app called, if you just Google Deep Time Walk, you'll find the app, and you can download it for free and just walk with it. And we did the script with Peter Oswald. I wrote the script with Peter Oswald, the great playwright, husband of Alice Oswald, and so it's really very good. I really like that app. The other experiential thing or a process that I got at the college was from Goethe, through doing holistic science and having an MSc in holistic science with Brian Goodwin. We invited some marvelous Goethean scientists to teach, Margaret Colquhoun and Craig Holdridge, and then also Henry Bortoff. And we spent time really learning how to relate to plants in particular, with our feeling, with our sensing, with our intuition, not so much with our thinking. And that was a big influence. That still continues to be a big influence on me. And I try to bring that sort of approach into what I can offer at the college.
I'm just curious how are you sensing these times? Because this journey you've been on, building this body of work and this, helping more people explore this different way of knowing our world, right? And and our place within it. What is your sense right now? We're in these kind of. I mean, I remember back in 2010, even when you showed us these slides, and I remember that phrase you're saying, we're at war with nature. That was a phrase you used that stuck with me. And so that's 12 years ago, I guess. What's your sense of where we are in this moment of time? Because I guess there's like you say, science, at least my understanding is that in some ways, the leading edges of science they're now converging with this ancient wisdom and all this indigenous knowledge. This story of interconnection, that everything is alive, that everything is in relationship. So in some ways, there's feels like we're in this really interesting time where there is this kind of widening acceptance, but also we're in this massively challenging time because of all these crises, and particularly, I guess, at least my sort of layman science understanding, particularly when we look at our Earth systems and what is going on, with these sort of various, tipping points and feedbacks. But what is your sense of where we are? How do you feel things are right now as we begin this year?
Well, it's a very bad situation, I would say. I think we're still fundamentally still at war with nature. Although I suppose 10 years ago, we may not have been as aware as we are now that we are at war with nature. I think more and more people are coming to realize that. Witness Extinction Rebellion, for example. Those brave folks who sit down and get arrested because they realize that there's a war. We're perpetrating a war against nature. But the situation globally, from a climate point of view and from a biodiversity point of view, it looks. I have to be honest with you. It looks very bleak, and very depressing. I find it very, very depressing. I mean, the amount of wild land that we've lost, and the incredibly rapid rise in global temperatures and levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is really horrific, really horrific. So I'm very disturbed by that every day. On the other hand, you have people like David Attenborough, who I deeply admire, writing this wonderful book he's just come out with. I think it's called Life on Our Planet. I recommend it to everybody. It's a tremendously good summary of the whole situation, and incredibly easy to read and very informative, beautifully, a real masterpiece. So he kind of embodies this new understanding of how we can live well with nature, and he describes the technology we need, the approaches we need. So that gives me hope. He's very respected. I think he'll have some influence. So this, let's call it a Gaian consciousness. It's gradually taking root inside people. People are waking up to it more and more, but it's slow. I think the waking up is far slower than the rate of destruction. And what we need now is the rate of waking up to overtake the rate of destruction. And the waking up's got to happen on a massive scale. And I don't know how that's going to happen. The positive side is that cultural revolutions can happen very quickly. Revolutions in consciousness can happen very quickly. This one has got to happen quicker than any other, and it's got to happen fast and on a global scale. And it's got to transcend national boundaries, political boundaries, all the sorts of boundaries that we humans have erected between ourselves, gender boundaries, all those boundaries, they've got to fall down. And we all have to unify to protect our very own planet, for her own sake and for our sake and for the sake of all beings. Is that going to happen? Well, I don't know. I mean, all I can say is that we must all do what we can, given the situations, our own particular life situations, without being too attached to the outcome. So in my case, I've been at Schumacher College for over 30 years, I think, and I've been, helping teach and writing books and speaking and doing. What else can I do? That's all I can do. That's what I've done. And I just hope it's had some effect. There's nothing more I can do. And at least I've got that sort of satisfaction. And I've got the satisfaction of seeing how, yourself and other wonderful students and participants who've been to the college take this stuff out into the world and do things with it and make really great changes because of Schumacher College. So that gives me hope. So I suppose I have hope in the face of a very, very dangerous and very serious situation. I still have some hope, but things are getting to, it's really end game time now. And that worries me hugely.
No, thank you for that. And I feel I have a very kind of similar kind of feeling of what's unfolding, and I come back now. I mean, more and more to all of this work because this, and back to feeling. So I'm just a huge believer that now that And I guess that's the challenge as well, because it feels like we're going to have to feel our way into this new world. And again, it's not to neglect the intellect, but without an experience, without a shift in perception, I worry that I actually don't believe we're able to reimagine in a meaningful way to really. Because we know, we can recreate everything. It's all possible. It's happening. So, I mean, that's the exciting thing about now. We kind of figured out how to create better human systems on every level. Better for all people, better for the more than human world. Better in every way. But actually, in order to really for all of these ideas to really come to their fruition, there's a breakthrough in perception, a feeling. It's almost like I call it like a feeling revolution almost, that's sort of required, and that's more difficult because it has to happen at a human level. It's not it's not something you can sort of scale through sort of advertising or messages, or it's a feeling, which is why I think the work that that you do and many others is just so vital for these. It feels very vital work for these times, and maybe we can move into the new book, Stephan, at this point.
Yes. Okay.
And Gaia Alchemy. Would you like to share something from the book?
Yeah, let me see. Let's see. I've got something here. I could read you. You mean to read you something? Yes.
Yeah. And then we can maybe just talk about.
Well, this is from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why science? Why? I think this is about why put alchemy with science. It upsets quite a few people. This kind of thing. Alchemy has got a bad name in our culture. So anyway, I'll just read it. It doesn't take long. I'll read this little section here. I'm grateful to science for what it has taught us factually about the world. But I've also come to realize that science on its own will not help us to make the world a better place, for science develops our thinking to a large extent, but does not deliberately and systematically develop our feelings of love for the whole of nature. The result of this is that we are unable to perceive the immense value and importance of Gaia and all her beings. All this because we scientists have not been educated from early on how to cultivate, refine, and listen to those feelings of love and valuing as part and parcel of our practice of science. Science has made us immensely clever, but has not made us wise. It is wisdom we need now in this time of severe global ecological crisis. We need a new kind of science that values wisdom a little bit more than cleverness. We must become Gaia wise in these very difficult times by putting wisdom and science together. This is what we at Schumacher College call holistic science. But what is wisdom? A wise person knows how to think, how to value, how to sense, and how to evoke intuitive insights, and knows when and how to bring these modalities compassionately to the fore in any given situation. Such a person also pays attention to dreams, knows how to enter deep meditative states, and feels the thrum of living nature in their heart. Obtaining this kind of consciousness may seem almost impossible today. However, by simply intending to do this, somehow it happens more and more. Wisdom springs from ancient regions of the psyche, from our most earthy, down-to-earth feeling for the things and beings around us. Science, quite rightly, seeks new models, new concepts, new ideas, and new experiments. In contrast, wisdom flourishes when we make contact with waves of seeing and understanding that have been with us since the very glimmerings of human consciousness, very first glimmerings of human consciousness in humanity's early days of hunting and gathering, when we first wondered at the majesty of the stars and at the immense profusion of living beings around us. Alchemy is a pathway to wisdom. The great Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung rediscovered how alchemy helps us release the deep nature-connecting powers buried deep within our psyche. Jung is also the founder of depth psychology, the science of the unconscious mind and its relation to our conscious self. As he pointed out, There is no wisdom without the participation of our 2 million-year-old self, the part of us that holds the wisdom and experience of humanity accumulated down the ages. Alchemy opens up channels into valuing, sensing, and intuiting and thinking that we never knew we had. It makes us more whole, more alive, more earthy. Furthermore, it helps us to realize that thinking is just one of our 4 major ways of knowing, and encourages us to cultivate the poor relation in our personality, the way of knowing we like least and which makes us feel most uncomfortable. Often for scientists and other thinking types, this inferior function, as Jung called it, is feeling. By feeling, I mean our ability to perceive the value of things, not with our heads, but with our hearts, which are, of course, connected with love. We need much more of this way of feeling and perceiving the immense value of nature to help us through these troubled times.
Thank you, Stephan. Yeah. So tell me about this bringing this together with this Gaia alchemy. Where's this come from for you? And
yeah, well, the Gaia side is for me the scientific side part. Well, not entirely, but there's from Lovelock and from all that sort of work of what we now call Earth system science. The carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. The Earth is a great integrated, complex system. What we know about plate tectonics, what we know about the history of the Earth through geological time, all of that incredible body of science-based knowledge, which, as I mentioned earlier, is fascinating, but also has no soul, really.
Yeah.
I wanted to put that together with soul. And then I've known about alchemy for many years, but I've never really connected with it. And then in one of my friend's library, in the library of an old friend of mine, I found an old manuscript of Jung's speaking about alchemy. And suddenly something happened. I sort of recognized it somehow. It's almost as if you could say the old alchemists or Jung himself started speaking to me through those yellowed pages. It's as if I went back into the mind of an alchemist. I could see what they were getting at. I could see what they were after. And they were after soul, basically. But also they worked directly with nature. I mean, they did chemical experiments, although their chemistry was, we would say now, rubbish. I mean, they didn't discover much about real chemistry. So their science wasn't really up to much. But nevertheless, they discovered everything about soul through interacting with nature. They weren't just sitting back and speculating about it, like many philosophers have done. They tried to turn real lead into real gold. And the worst of them did it for money, or try to make money. The best of them realized that they were trying to transform the lead of the world, the lead in their own souls, into gold, into enlightenment, into happiness, into connection with nature. That was the gold. So all of that, because of their connection with nature and because of their emphasis on soul, that again seemed to fill a big gap in my own search for meaning. I'd got lots of the science, and Gaian science is already reasonably soulful, but the alchemy seemed to fill up the soul part of things for me rather well. I liked the images. I liked the fact that we offered many images to contemplate and meditate on, and I started doing that, and I started noticing that I would get wonderful feelings of wholeness coming upon me, sort of insights coming upon me that I would never knew I had, sort of understandings, insights, very difficult to describe it, sort of openings in one's understanding, through contemplating alchemical symbols. And then, of course, I wanted to make the effort of linking that with the science of Gaia. And that's why I wrote Gaia Alchemy. So it's really the alchemy of Gaia, the planet, and also the alchemy of Gaia as ourselves, as Gaian beings within our Gaian planet.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Yeah, amazing. It's you talk about this profound personal experiences of psyche and soul to reclaim our lost sacred wholeness. This stuff again. It's like, for me, this is like so, this is where all the energy goes for me. But again, this is really, again, when we think of science, this feels kind of radical again. I mean, it's not radical because we need radical, right? It's like these times are calling for like as radical as we can get, I think. But this idea of the personal experience and the personal psyche and the personal soul. So what I experience a lot through my work and working with people is I'm not, this isn't a sweeping statement, but I would say there is a crisis of soul going on. I would say that many people are deeply struggling with finding meaning in the world right now. And part of that I perceive to be this lack of connection with all that is not human, with this living world. So a sort of we're sort of creating these lives that are so removed from, they're so human. They've been shaped and constructed in ways that what I see now as we enter into these times of crises, that actually with this lack of meaning, it's even more difficult to make sense of these crises, because there's a meaning definite, a soul, a deep kind of soul crisis. Is that sort of where this is exploring, and is this part of this? Does that sort of connect?
Yes, I suppose in a way, this kind of work is always very personal. So I suppose I'm trying to heal my own crisis of meaning, which has been very intense for me. I suffer from a crisis of meaning. Yeah, definitely,
100%.
So this for me, Gaia Alchemy has helped me to heal that crisis of meaning, and I think I'm a lot better with it than I was. And because, the nice thing about it is you take one of those alchemical images, for example, which I write about in the book, the Azoth the Azoth de Philosophe, the Azoth Mandala.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that. What is that? What is that?
Well, you have to put a picture of it up on if you can.
Yeah, I'll be able to put a picture.
It's a 7-rayed star, basically. And each of the rays, it's very deep symbol. Each of the rays represents an alchemical process, and each of those 7 alchemical processes for me represent both a psychological process in myself and on the earth, as also part of Gaia. In fact, you see, those images I like Jung, I think, I regard them as being given to us by nature. We didn't create them, we received them from what Jung and Freud, I suppose, particularly Jung, would call the unconscious or the collective unconscious. That would be Jung, not Freud, the collective unconscious. It gives us images, this deep stratum of the psyche of the world. Yeah. The anima mundi. It gives us images, trying to help us with images to feel this deep sense of connection again. Because it seems that our human consciousness has this tendency to split itself off from nature. Maybe that's why the indigenous people are forever doing rituals and ceremonies and dances,
Yeah, to keep that relationship.
Going. Yeah. So this particular image, and there are many alchemical images, called the Azoth de Philosophe, is a lovely image, not too complicated. It's been given to us by nature to contemplate. And it's got 7 basic operations that happen everywhere in nature on different scales. And the first one is calcination, burning. You have to burn something off and leave a white ash. You can see in yourself that's burning off the wrong views that one has about things and leaving a sort of residue there. You need fire for that. The planet is Saturn. It's a very heavy, leaden kind of situation. It's sometimes linked to depression. It's the nigrido in alchemy, when you do feel pretty meaningless and lost. And that's to do with, you have to sort of burn that off somehow. On the planet, the calcination could be plate tectonics, for example, when rocks on the surface are pushed deep down and molten. That's a kind of calcination. We could say CO2 in the atmosphere is a kind of calcination, because that warms up the planet. We are calcining the planet dreadfully, making it much too warm by destroying the biodiversity and emitting greenhouse gases. Metabolism is a kind of calcination. You can see the parallels. Then the next phase is dissolution. The next ray is dissolution, dissolving. You dissolve what's left of this burning process On Gaia, of course, it's rainfall and rock weathering and all these things, you see. And you can use the rainfall and rock weathering of Gaia. I try to use it to feel dissolution in myself psychologically. Then you get a separation. The next ray is separation. You get a separation of these elements within yourself which you didn't know you had. And also in Gaia, it would be simple atoms that form themselves into the precursor molecules of life. Let's say sugar molecules, amino acids, etc. They form themselves. And then we've got the next ray, which is conjunction, where in ourselves, we have a sort of solar consciousness appears, a kind of wholeness happens. What was separated now comes together into a new sense of wholeness. And on the earth, that's the appearance of life, I would say. Then the next ray is fermentation, where you ferment what's been produced. And in Gaia, it's the literal fermentation processes carried out by microbes and fungi. And in myself, it's a sort of fermentation of this thing that's conjoined in the previous ray. Then there's distillation. We distill this even further. In Gaia, it's ecosystems and ecological communities becoming more and more connected to each other, more efficient in their functioning together as integrated wholes. In myself, it's doing the same psychologically. And finally, you have coagulation, where in us, I think it's an experience of the living Gaia. You just know that the planet really is alive and that it does have some mysterious purpose. And then you see Gaia, coagulation is really the final blending between ourselves and the planet. And then we start again, we go around the whole thing again. That's the sort of thing I describe in the book.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot there. There's where you started when you're talking about images. And there's something, as I said, when I went back to the start of the conversation, when I was saying, after leaving Schumacher, nothing was the same again. And you were talking about your own crisis of meaning as well. And, I've very much been, journeying up and down with my own, over the last 10, 12 years, my own personal crises of all of this, as I feel like it's unavoidable when we face into these crises and start to look and explore more deeply around us what might be happening. And, but this idea of images, and I've often wondered, like, again, in sort of a little bit of this, I guess, modernity and as we've sort of, particularly I can speak, in this culture, in this country, but even things like the sort of demise of the arts, of expression through, and I think a lot of that comes, not about just our education systems, but again, how we've sort of made this stuff to feel like, you got to be good at something, and we don't work with visual expression very much anymore. And I remember actually once doing some work, doing a medicine walk actually in Dartmoor, and we spent several hours out at dawn one morning, came back to this fire, and we were visited by Martin Shaw, the great mythologist, and he spoke to us about not reflecting on what we'd experienced out on the landscapes, but just maybe to draw any particular images that were sitting with us, having come back in from spending some time on our own out on the moors. And I remember, drawing these, whatever they were, in this notebook. And actually, and he said, just, don't try and make sense of anything, but just what are these images that might be coming up for you? And I actually remember, finding it really very, very easy actually to sort of, to create these kind of images with a pencil. And then he said, don't try and sort of work it out, but see what happens over the next week or so, and then actually starting to create meaning and story, if you like, through those images. And actually I can still remember them now, and that was 8 years ago, but there's something you're talking about, these images and how we work with images, which I think is really interesting, because it feels like, again, that's sort of, it's a way of, it feels like a very human thing actually, to sort of, to co-create almost with the living world through images. But that's something that, again, has been, almost taken away from it, or maybe, do you know what I mean? It's not something that we're practicing as a en masse as a species. And I wonder where these kinds of ideas, whether they feel very, very vital.
Well, I mean, the children are encouraged to draw images, aren't they? Particularly in alternative schools, Montessori, Steiner, etc. But as you say, we don't value the psyche enough. We don't value ourselves enough. We don't value what we have, our own treasures. I mean, the human psyche is magnificent, really. It's much more than our little constrained egos, which limit us so much, much more there. But the thing is, what's there is not the ego. It's beyond the ego. I have trouble understanding that, when I'm stuck in myself and feeling hemmed about by my own limitations. I have trouble understanding it. But then when I start drawing images, or when I write down my dreams and ponder what they might be telling me, suddenly you feel the presence of a different center, which is communicating with you. It's sort of outside your normal consciousness, but it's showing you itself to you, and it does through the realm of images mostly. And music, of course, poetry, those are all forms of image. Yeah. The unconscious, or the self, speaks through images. And the image par excellence from the self is the mandala, the circular figure, like the Azoth mandala I was mentioning earlier. That's archetypal. You find that in all human cultures all over the planet. So part of our education, I think, from childhood onwards, is to take these images seriously and learn how to work with them. So everyone's doing it. Everyone's drawing their own mandalas. Everyone's listening to, writing down their dreams and pondering their dreams and discussing their dreams with their friends. Just like indigenous people used to do. But we're also scientists, that we're still doing science. We still have our technology. We're still developing ways of capturing carbon or not emitting carbon. We're still finding ways of creating green energy from the sun. We're still developing agricultural systems that feed us healthy food without destroying biodiversity. We're doing all that. And in fact, the more we connect with the archetypal world of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, through drawing images and paying attention to our dreams, the better we are at doing those things. The more inspiration we have, the more we understand why we're doing it, the more the earth comes alive. And the more ideas we're given from that realm. You could ask, where do all the great ideas come from? Do we invent them, or are we given them? I think we're given them. And if we're cultivating our relationship with what Jung would call the unconscious, that's to say what's beyond our egos, what we're not conscious of, then we get better ideas. We get closer to nature. We get closer to each other. And it's also good for our psychological health. We have a lot of mental illness in our culture nowadays, a lot of mental ill health. Yeah. That's because we're not cultivating our connection with what lies beyond our ego, with the deeper psyche, which is ultimately the psyche of nature. So I think we need to change our educational system that we include psyche in the whole process of education.
All of where I keep looking back to and in inquiring into all of this, again, what I keep looking back to is this. It's almost we think of the sort of modern human culture and a society now that spends less and less time out on the landscapes, out on the rivers, on the but it feels such an this is such a key part of building this relationship, this experience, in order to like you say, to sort of for these to sort of connect more deeply with our own psychic selves, for these ideas and dreams to arise in us, for us to understand these interconnections and these relationships, and then to, like you say, to bring this energy and stuff back into our lives, and how do we sort of co-create this future, which is going to blend both, modern technology and ancient wisdom, and so I keep coming back to this thing of like, without that sort of regular connection to the more than human world, I struggle to see how, that's the bit, I guess, where we started the conversation, where how, that feels so key, that experience, that experiential. And so what I'm interested in a lot in my work is where I can help others open up their shift their perspectives, tools, practices, all the things I've learned from amazing people like yourselves and many others, just how do we keep passing this stuff on, and helping more and more people find these things. Because again, not as this is the answer, I don't want to go into that binary culture again of, right versus wrong, left versus right, all that stuff. But actually, I do feel like such a key part. And it's and also, like you say, because it makes people feel so much better. We actually, it's like, who wouldn't want to feel better?
Yes, right.
So yeah, I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it's an interesting one about that dance between, practice, I guess, and connection, which has always been so I think so deep in your work. And I think you speak to that in this new book, don't you? You've there's some meditations and practices and things.
Yes, there's meditations. And also I encourage people to find what I call their Gaia place. Somewhere close to where you live, find, or even inside, if you can't get out, to make a Gaia place in your flat, it's just a little bit of nature, which is wilder, a little bit wild or quite wild, or not too disturbed by people, where you can go and just spend time, but you go again and again and again and again. And you might take a dream there to ponder about a dream. You might have a life situation you're struggling with. Well, take it to your Gaia place and ponder, ask for help from nature. Or there may be something, you may be writing something, you need inspiration, or you need new understanding, or you need an insight, or you just need to relax. I take all of that to my Gaia places. And I just show up the same place again and again. I mean, I've got 3 or 4 of them close to my house. I go take them there, no matter what my mood, happy, sad, whatever it is, I just go to my Gaia place. And if I sit there long enough, I always get some help. An idea might pop into my head, why don't you do this? And say I'm doing a certain kind of research. An idea will come up. Look at this or look at that. Or if I'm pondering a dream, what on earth could last night's dream be telling me? I might suddenly get an insight. So Gaia place is very, very important. And if you can't go outside, for example, I had some folks I was working with in Brazil when there was a tremendous lockdown because of the coronavirus. Some of them made Gaia places in their apartments, high up on a multi-story skyscraper. They'd get a few plants together. They'd order some plants and put them together on a table. And that would be their Gaia place. I've got a Gaia place like that in my house, a winter Gaia place. So when it's really cold outside and dark and I don't really want to go out because it's not very good for my health, and I'll just sit with my little Gaia place indoors with my plants on a little table and imagine that they're a jungle, which they are. They make a sort of jungle together. So the Gaia place, I think, is very important. And it's a very simple thing to do. Of course, if you're living in a city, it may be difficult to get to a Gaia place. That's why I think that we need to rewild the cities. I'm not the first person to say that. I'm glad to say there's a whole movement now for making cities permeated with wild places, so everyone can have access to a Gaia place. But as I say, even if you're in the middle of a big city like London, and you can't get to a nice bit of wild nature, you can create one in your own house, just a little corner of your house or your table where you can have some plants that you look after and just try to create the feeling of a wild jungle with those plants. And that becomes your Gaia place.
Yeah, I love that. And it feels now with this, again, with this, the pressure everyone is under with our sort of these technologies that are kind of hijacking our attention, which obviously there's all these extraordinary things that we can do, like recording this podcast, for example. But these social technologies that, I think there's that are, as we now really understand, they are really, our attention is being depleted, being taken by, it's increasingly difficult to take yourself, sort of unplug yourself, if you like, from the machine, let's call it. And but actually, this becomes even more, these Gaian places, sit spots, these things become so vital because actually building those habits. Because I guess, like, someone was saying to me the other day, this is possibly the worst time ever for our attention to being hijacked, because we need humans to have their attention right now. You know what I mean? There's a lot to be focused on right now, and and so we think of this, and it made me think a little bit about, again, looping right back to where we began, when I remember when you introduced that, some of the sort of Descartes and Bacon and that idea of sort of nature as a machine. But actually, in many ways, it feels like we're sort of now, we're part of a machine now, our sort of global civilized, our sort of techno culture, which has become almost more machine-like. And actually then we look to Gaia now and see this potentially, because these things like the metaverse, I'm like, well, we've got the universe. We don't need the metaverse. But it's interesting, isn't it? This, we need, Gaia needs us, right? But we need Gaia so much now, in the potential now to build these habits, I think, to really help us, to help so many of us who are, I think, feeling pretty anxious about things. So these practices feel like they could unlock so much magic for folks.
Yes, they can. I mean, nature is full of magic, really. I think we just have to be patient. I mean, sometimes when I go to my Gaia place, it depends what's been happening, but it takes a while for the magic to work. And I just sit there and nothing, it's just, I'm just being my ordinary self. And then gradually, I can feel something animate reaching out to me from nature, from the trees, from the stream, from whatever. And then I feel more and more comfortable in that. It sort of starts dissolving my boundaries and permeating me, and I permeate Gaia. And if a conversation strikes up between the two of us, and that's our given human birthright. Everyone's capable of that. Everyone has that ability inborn, just like we all breathe, and we all have to eat. So we all can commune with Gaia in that way. It's fundamental human quality to be able to do that. In fact, we need it just like we need food. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think the Gaia place is very important. Some people call it sit spot, you see, but I prefer to call it Gaia place because the practice for me is, whilst I'm sitting in my Gaia place and appreciating the forms and colors and shapes of all the trees and plants or whatever, I'm also allowing all of that perception to lead me into a sense of the planet as one great living whole. That's why I call it a Gaia place. It's a place where you connect with Gaia as well as with the place in its locality and in uniqueness. I'm also connecting with Gaia. And I like to connect with Gaia as an intact Gaia as she was just before we started destroying her so much. Maybe, let's say, 400 years ago, even at the time of the scientific revolution, a lot of Gaia was still pretty much intact. Although some of her cultures, indigenous cultures, have been wrecked by Westerners. I'm thinking of South America in particular. But anyway, you sit there and I try to feel the great forests extending out from where I am towards the east. It would have been a great sort of temperate forest, and I imagine what's going on in the north. What would have happened in the north? The Arctic still wonderful, with wonderful ice cap to the south, the Sahara Desert and Africa and the savannas and the savanna woodlands, and then the Atlantic Ocean, and then South America with the rainforest and the Pacific Ocean, etc., Australia, New Zealand. I try to really connect with the whole planet when I'm in my Gaia place. And that brings me some sort of sense of healing. And then, of course, at the same time, I'm also connecting with the devastation that we're creating. So it's both of those things. So that's a sort of simple practice that one can do. A Gaia place practice, you could call it.
Brilliant. I remember at Schumacher, you invited us to lay on our backs. It's a practice you wrote about actually in Inanimate Earth, but it was
that's right.
Yeah. And that idea of being held by this great big living earth, and sort of looking down, almost down into space, being held, which is just magic.
Yes. So the idea is that we are being held upside when we lie down on our backs on the surface of our planet. We're being held upside down by the love that the great bulk of the earth, Gaia, feels for the matter in our bodies. And we're being held upside down by that love, upside down over the cosmos. This idea about love is an older idea than gravity. Gravity is what we call it. That the ancients called it more of a love, that the earth has a love for her matter and brings it back to herself when it tries to fall away from her. So that's right. That's one of the practices I have in Animate Earth. I have another more extended one, which is, I think it would take too long to read now, in Gaia Alchemy, but a more extended meditation of the same kind. So those are sorts of things you can do. And I'm not the only one to offer meditations like that. The work of Joanna Macy offers you lots and lots of things of that sort, I'm trying to think of other people. Chris Johnson, who's worked with Joanna Macy. Chris Salisbury, who's doing similar things for children. I mean, there are many, many people who are working like this now.
He's been on the podcast, Chris Salisbury. I trained with Chris.
Oh, good,
yeah. On the first Call of the Wild, actually, that he did.
Yeah, he's wonderful. That kind of work Chris does is
it's amazing. Yeah. Well, that's the exciting stuff, isn't it? There is all this extraordinary. There is an extraordinary body of work that's out there. That's now available. It's always been there, right. But now now it's about helping bring more of that into making that more accessible.
Yes, exactly.
So listen. Thank you for this conversation. There's so much in here, and I really look forward to getting the new book, and we will no doubt cross paths when my next visit down to Schumacher. I always finish this this podcast with actually two things. First of all is the best way for people to connect with you or follow your work more or get more deeply. Where would you point people?
Well, I haven't got a website, you see. People have asked me about this. I haven't, because I don't like spending too long on the computer. So
Love it.
I haven't got a website. So I don't know how to answer that question.
I love that. That's probably the best way. That's why you've got a relationship with Gaia.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, I love to be in touch with people, especially now in these times when we've had to be isolated. So maybe through the college website, and you can find an email address there. If anyone wants to contact me. Whether I'll be able to answer or not, I don't know, because emails take a long time to answer.
And what is the can you give us any update on Schumacher and just because I remember even just from a sort of building perspective, there was a lot of shift going on.
Well, one of Satish Kumar's friends gave £2 million to fix the old postern, which is the home of Schumacher College, and that's been going on for fix the roof and also redo the interior. That's been going on for I think 3 years or more, just over 3 years, around 3 years. So that project's coming to completion soon, and we should be able to move back into the building maybe in the autumn. I'm not quite sure, but it's coming to an end now. The roof is pretty much fixed. I think they're starting to work on the interior. So soon Schumacher College will be back as the core of Schumacher College. The old postern will be back as the core of Schumacher College. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's a very special place.
Yeah. In the meantime, there are more master's degrees. So look on the website. We started with one master's degree, holistic science, which I helped Brian Goodwin to start. And now there's many other master's courses in food growing and engaged ecology with my friend and colleague Andy Letcher, who's a wonderful teacher, and his sidekick Sarah. So, wonderful courses. There's design, ecological design, there's economics, all master's degrees, and there are still short courses going on. So people should look on the website.
Yeah, I'll link to all of that in the.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. So I tend to finish the podcast with this. This gets the inspiration for the podcast around this kind of the analogy of the Earth as a spaceship, and this idea of becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. I'm just curious as what that might bring up for you right now.
Yeah, well, I find it a little bit problematic, to be honest with you. Not wanting to upset you, Dan, in any way.
You won't upset me.
No, I mean, I see what you mean. But a spaceship is a machine that's been created by people. So I think spaceship is a little bit too much of the machine metaphor for me, because when I think of a spaceship, I can't help but think of the space station, for example, or a rocket blasting off to the moon with, a machine very carefully crafted to keep people alive out in space or on distant planets. So that's a problem with me for spaceship. Although I see what you mean.
So it's funny because where I've got to with it, so I've been exploring this idea of being crew on this kind of great big living spaceship.
Well, maybe spaceship works in the culture. Maybe it works. Maybe people will understand that. They understand machines pretty well. Yeah, and the one idea I like, I think David Abraham expresses really well, which is that we have two bodies. One is our human body, which we're very familiar with, and that lives inside the wider body, the larger body of the earth, of Gaia. Just like bacteria live inside our guts, so do we live inside Gaia. See, a lot of people now know about the microbiome in the gut, don't they? It's becoming common knowledge. So we're a bit like that. We're like microbiota, if you like, inside this great living being, which is our planet. See, I prefer that because it's more biological. It's it's not a machine metaphor at all. It's a biological metaphor. And after all, the Earth is a great biology, really. Anyway, yes. Well, thank you too, Dan. It's been very nice talking to you.
Yeah, no, it's been brilliant, and thank you so much, as I said, just again for all that you're doing, and for taking the time out today. It's been brilliant to listen to you, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephan.
If you've appreciated listening to this podcast, would you consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a rating or review via your podcast provider? It helps more people to find us, and we'd be most grateful.
So I hope you enjoyed that episode with Stephan. Lots in that. If you did, please give it a share to someone else that might enjoy it. And of course, a rating and a review, obviously. If you've got stuff that's coming up for you, let us know about it. Leave us a comment in the Instagram feed or send us an email, hello@thespaceship.earth. We'd love to hear what this stuff is bringing up. You can sign up to our irregular newsletter for news on new episodes, community gatherings and more. There are very exciting plans afoot for our radical learning experiences kicking off in the autumn, the Becoming Crew experiences. So subscribe to get these updates and opportunities. We'd be very grateful to hear from you. So I'm going to play out with a track. This is from a new initiative from the music industry and wider communities. It's an initiative called Earth%, set up by the legend that is Brian Eno. And Earth% is about encouraging musicians and artists and the wider music industry and communities to support climate action in multiple ways. Last month, around Earth Day, they released a bunch of tracks from some incredible artists, all via Bandcamp, and donations of which fundraise for the Earth% charity. I bought a load of them, and this is a track from Brian Eno himself. It's called Did the World Begin Today? So, take good care of yourself, of those around you, and of our more than human family. Until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Vicky Turner, Show Notes; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.
Do there.